Thank you to Zen Peacemakers. Jeff and Myoshin have both been so gracious and warm in their hosting of me, and it's just wonderful to be here and make this connection. I'm also duly ordained, duly as in dutifully, I guess, and duly as in two ordinations. So I'm actually ordained in a progressive Christian tradition called Metropolitan Community Churches, which is a church founded with a specific outreach to the LGBTQ population, of which I'm a member. And it is also, I'm also ordained in a Tibetan Nyingma tradition. And so often I find myself preaching at churches, as I did last Sunday. That's my usual stump. And so to be here with fellow Buddhists is really a delight. And it's really special and wonderful for me to be here with you to talk about the Dharma and talk in those terms that mean so very much to me in my life and in my practice. So thank you for this opportunity. What I thought I would do with our time is to give you an introduction to the night ministry. I do have a slideshow, however, mercifully, it's all photos. So there's no text, it's just some photos to show you a little bit about what we do. And I'll try to keep that relatively short, seven or 8 minutes, something like that, just to give you a feel for what we do. And then I do actually have some Dharma reflections to share that will, just to give you a little sense of one way of framing the work I see us doing in the night ministry through my Buddhist lens. And it's just one way that I think about it and one way that I reflect on it, and it may be worth sharing with you. So. And then after that, spend most of the time, the remaining time, just answering questions and engaging with you and being in fellowship and just seeing what comes up. So that's the plan for the next few minutes here to the top of the next hour. So with that, I'll share my screen here and show you a little bit about what we do at the night ministry. So I want to make sure, is everyone seeing the slideshow okay, or no, not yet? Nope, okay, hold on. We just practiced this? No, here we go.
Yeah, there we go.
Looking good, okay, all right. So the night ministry was founded 57 years ago in 1964. So we actually just celebrated our 57th anniversary of our first night walk, which was November 1st of 1964. It was Reverend Don Stewart was the night minister at the time. And it started out as a ministry of walking the streets at that time till 6 a.m. every night, and also doing a phone line, mainly staffed by lay people, mainly lay women. So the church women would come and do the phones, and the night minister, this is just the way it was in the times, the night minister would walk the streets. And I actually have a photo here of our first coordinator of the phone counselors, which is Joanne Chadwick, who's basically an honorary night minister as far as I'm concerned, because she really started that part of the program. And then it's continued after Don Stewart through a successive generation of night ministers. So we've had 5 night ministers total. And then the organization just more recently is moving from having a night minister run the organization to having an executive director. And that's me. I'm basically the first executive director. I've been here for 2 years. And so, yeah, it started out from a council of churches, local Protestant churches that got together and wanted to do something collectively. They had a couple of different ministries, the night ministry just being one of them. And it was never about converting or judging or anything like that. It was just about going out on the streets, providing some basic needs, some referral services, and then just being a loving presence for people. So that's really what it's been about from the beginning. In fact, we've been closely related to the suicide prevention hotline, and Joanne Chadwick went and became the executive director of that line after she worked at the night ministry. So we have always also been a crisis line in addition to just people calling in and wanting a prayer or meditation or just someone to talk to at night. And then our current iterations, we've got several different areas. We continue to do the night walks now every night till 4 a.m., walking out in different neighborhoods. We have the phone line. It's called the Care Line, and we've now expanded into some community programs, which are all outdoor, street level religious offerings. And I'll tell you about those in a minute. And then clinical pastoral education, or CPE, which is what Jeff is referring to. Amy was one of our CPE students last summer, and actually one of our incoming CPE students. Kat is in the audience tonight. So hi, Kat, it's good to see you. And that is an accredited training program for seminarians and upcoming spiritual leaders. So we do that here at the Night Ministry. And there's our mission and vision, increasing access to spiritual care and community. So there's a social justice component to what we're doing. We're increasing the access to having spiritual care chaplaincy, community chaplaincy, and also just forming community, spiritual community out on the streets that anybody can access and be a part of. So we do our nightly walks. Here we are taking our pandemic precautions out in the streets at night. The ministers wear whatever is appropriate to their religious tradition. Most of the ministers wear collars because that's just the most recognizable, most comfortable, but we've had folks wear yarmulkes and even just name tags. And I'm forgetting the name of the Zen, maybe you can help me, Jeffrey, the rakusu, is that what it's called? The
rakusu, yes.
Yes, okay. So we've had ministers wear their rakusus in the past. So here's some examples of the night walks. And then our care line now has been completely transferred to the home. There's our staff over here, and then on the left is a care line counselor. Because of the pandemic, we used to have the counselors come to the office, but now people work from home. We've got care line counselors all over the world. We've got them in Ireland and Germany and Hawaii and New York and Texas, and that's just one of the things that's happened since the pandemic. The care line is open to everybody, 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. Pacific. There's our phone number there. Feel free to call us or to pass it along. You don't have to be in crisis. It's just really for a chance to tell a story, tell what's happened in your day. Some people just share a joy. Others are in active crisis, and we have our trained counselors respond to them from everything from suicide or reliving trauma or active even abuse situations. So they were trained for that. Our community programs are a multi-faith offering out on the streets. This is our open cathedral. This was actually Monday, Thursday, the foot washing ceremony. That was when we restarted our open cathedrals. There's Easter. We restarted them after the pandemic. We do 2 services a week. Thursday, bilingual Spanish service at the Mission and 16th BART station in San Francisco, and then a Sunday open Civic Center service. Here we are blessing the newly installed Lutheran bishop, first transgender bishop in the Lutheran Church, and maybe even in any church. I'm not sure. Megan Rohr, who is the bishop of the Sierra Pacific Synod of the Lutheran Church, and they're big supporters of the Night Ministry. We have a bunch of other new offerings. Faithful and Fabulous is our LGBTQ offering. Here's our ministers doing a service of all kinds of clergy and drag performances and whatnot during Gay Pride. And then our first open Shabbat was over the summer. There's Rabbis Jeremy and Adam, and we're having our first open Hanukkah in 2 weeks, the lighting of the first Hanukkah candle, as well as another open Shabbat service. And we actually have a Buddhist meditation group, which I don't have photoed here, but we've done a number of programs with the Buddhist meditation group, and we've got practitioners in various traditions, both the insight meditation, Zen traditions, and then I guess I'm holding down the Tibetan tradition in the Vajrayana. So we are hoping to expand. We want to do an open Ramadan, an open Diwali. We want to have various offerings for folks on the streets. So that's the idea. Keep increasing access to spiritual care and community. Our clinical pastoral education program is our formal and accredited program for the training of folks who are going into chaplaincy or ministry. Most Christian denominations require CPE. It's field training as a part of becoming ordained, but we get students from every tradition, basically. And it's learning how to be in spiritual formation with each other, to really form as caregivers and take on a spiritual leader identity. To the extent we all know identities in this crowd are very ephemeral in some ways, but they're skillful means, and there's an important part of the formation process. And then we do that in the clinical setting. So the CPE students go out and do everything that all the other night ministers do. They do the street walks and the phones and the community programs, and then learn together in groups, in small group training. And then I'll just show you one last thing is Something we do in partnership with several organizations is the annual vigil, where we read the names of all of the folks who have passed on the streets that year. It's always way too high. Even one is too high. I think last year there were 283. And we do that in partnership with several organizations. Skywatchers do these beautiful banners honoring the name of every person. Every name is read, a bell is rung. It's an interfaith service. We have Buddhist and Muslim and earth-centered spirituality. We do a land acknowledgement. Christian ministers, rabbi, etc., all participate in this open air service with several community partners, and night ministry is one of them. So that just gives you another example of the kind of thing that we're involved in. So that's my slideshow. That's a little bit about the night ministry. Now I'm wondering if I could just change my view here so I'm not looking at myself. There we go. I find it very distracting to have my own view up. Oh, and Scott Hill is here. So good to see you, Scott. Scott's one of our volunteer ministers at the Open Cathedral services and elsewhere. He does many things with the night ministry. Great to see you, Scott. Thank you. So yeah, that gives you a little sense of the night ministry, and I'm looking forward to taking some questions here in a few minutes, but I thought I'd give you a little bit of a Dharma reflection, mainly because, like I said, it's fun for me to do. Because like I said, I'm mostly preaching in church, so this is really fun for me. And I got to tell you, even though I'm ordained in, I was ordained with a Dzogchen transmission, and I've actually was a student of Chogyam Trungpa's. So that's my full Dharma ordination. The bulk of my training was actually done in the early tradition. So I practiced with the Theravada Thai forest monks of Abhayagiri, and I've done a master's degree in Buddhist studies. And as a part of that, I did a master's thesis on the Sutta of the Noble Search, the Arya Paryasena Sutta. And so the literary structure of that sutta is something that I explored, and that sutta is very dear to me. And I want to share a little bit about that with you tonight. So actually I have this early tradition perspective. I think the only thing I'm missing is the Zen. Maybe you all can help fill me in, is the one in the middle. But I have many wonderful friends and connections with the Zen community as well. So the basic premise of what I want to offer, and I guess I titled this talk Faith in the Night. Faith in the Night is that going out on the streets is in part an inspiration to faith and an expression of faith. It's an inspiration to faith and an expression of faith. Now, I don't know about this circle, but sometimes in Buddhist circles, faith can be a somewhat problematic word, particularly if folks have had some kind of maybe even wounding, or perhaps just a kind of indifference or even an allergy to some of the Abrahamic traditions and the way that those have been structured and use the word faith. But faith is actually, in my reading and understanding, very important part of the Buddhist tradition. And in the early tradition, particularly, faith is the beginning of the path. Faith is the very first thing that happens, the very first stirring that gets one onto the noble search, which is the sutta I'm talking about, the Noble Search Sutta. That sutta is the story, one of the stories of the Buddha's journey to awakening, and it's thought by many scholars to be the oldest story of the Buddha's awakening in existence, certainly the oldest one that was recorded. Some quibble about that a little bit, but let's just say it's pretty old. And so what it is about it that's so fascinating to me is that I find in this sutta the seeds and the structure of both the early tradition and the Mahayana, all right there in this very old story of the Buddha's awakening. So I'm going to put the sutta one translation of the sutta here in the chat if you're interested in reading it later. And what do I mean by that is that the sutta does this whole arc of taking you through the Buddha starting out on the path, on the search for the deathless, the early tradition's word for that end of suffering. And it goes all the way through awakening. And then he, after he awakens, sits in repose and sort of thinks, this is going to be way too much trouble to try to explain to anybody else. So I think I'll just hang out here. And then Brahma comes to him and says, no, no, no. There are many beings with just a little bit of dust in their eyes who would benefit from you teaching the truth. And so the Buddha then says, open are the doors to the deathless. Let them who have ears show their faith. Those are the words he speaks as he then moves down back into the world to try to find somebody who will understand this teaching. So he moves from a state of awakening and enlightenment into the world through compassionate action. And just as a funny aside, the first person he meets is on the road, and he sort of pronounces that he's awakened, and he does it all in this prose and this flowery language, and the person sort of chuckles and says, yeah, okay, whatever, buddy, and walks on. So that's the first person the Buddha meets in the sutta, but then eventually comes back to the 5 bhikkhus, the 5 monks that he was practicing with earlier on. And actually, it's through their earlier friendship that he stirs faith in them to listen to him. He says, have I ever talked as if I was enlightened before? I've never talked this way before. You got to at least give me a chance, basically, is what he says, and they do. And he transmits, thus setting the wheel of the Dharma in motion. So there you have the kind of full structure of the sutta. You have the going forth and the coming back. And the Pali word for the Buddha in the sutta is the Tathagata, which you probably seen some nods are familiar with. The early tradition, and they can be translated 2 ways. The early tradition translates it as the thus gone one. And the Mahayana tradition typically translates it as the thus come one. And so there you have again the going forth and the return. And I suppose in some ways, the more we're thus gone from those attachments, that greed, hatred, and delusion that keep us locked in suffering, the more we're thus gone from those, the more actually we are thus come into our full humanity and expression. So in some ways, they're really just flip sides of the same thing. So, okay. So what I want to say about that is that, yeah, the Buddha, of course, you've probably heard the other sort of, one of the sort of founding myths is that the Buddha as a prince, Siddhartha was kept in his palace, is in a warrior caste. His father, the king, had heard a prophecy that he was either going to be the world honored one, an awakened one, and teach the Dharma, or he was going to be a world conquering one, the great king. And so the father wanted him to be the great king and kept him away from life, locked in the palace. And the Buddha, as a rambunctious teenager, I like to think, or at least a young man, manages to get out of the palace on several different trips and sees somebody who's very sick on a trip, and sees somebody who's very old, and I think there may have been, I can't remember if it was sick or maimed in some way, old, and then he sees a corpse. But on the 4th trip, he sees a spiritual seeker, a mendicant, a beggar who is a seeker. And it's that 4th one, the 4th messenger, the 4th heavenly messenger that inspires him. There's a way possibly out of all of this if I just go and seek. So that's not part of the Noble Search Sutta, but it's part of the kind of larger apocrypha. And in the Noble Search Sutta, he does talk about that. He says in the text, he's talking to the monks, later, while I was still a young black-haired young man endowed with the blessing of youth, in the prime of life, though my mother and father wished it otherwise, and they wept with tearful faces, I shaved off my hair and my beard, and I put on the yellow robe, and I went forth from the home life into homelessness. I went forth from the home life into homelessness. And so there we have one of the root metaphors of the Buddhist path is going forth into homelessness. Now, I don't want to in any way say that the condition of homelessness that we see out on the streets here in the city is somehow, we don't want to in any way denigrate that or to compare that to a privileged, at least for me, a white Western privileged practice of Buddhism. But there's something deep here in that the going forth into homelessness is a way of moving out of that which we are attached to, moving, shedding our attachments in the world. And actually, early tradition monks continue to shed their attachments and put on the saffron robe and pick up a beggar's bowl and actually only can receive food and sustenance from the generosity of others. And so that's still baked into the tradition in a very physical way, but in a more subtle way, what is our home? What is our home? It's all of that karmic conditioning, all of that way that we are patterned and habituated in our attachments, our way of seeing ourselves and seeing other people, all of our prejudices and all of our stereotypes and all of our cultural and our family history and our personality patterns and on and on and on, is all of these things that create these deep grooves that we in this group know as karma. That karma is our refuge. It's our home in the early Buddhist tradition. And when we are doing what in the sutta they talk about as the ignoble search, we're continuing to search for relief through the creation of more karma, trying to get relief in any other way by finding an object that will satisfy us. And going forth in that way, in a very deep way, is coming out of that karmic conditioning, coming into what I think this group would know as not knowing. So when we're out on the street, we're actually coming into a space, we're literally going forth, or we're attempting to go forth from all of that cultural conditioning, all of those ways in which we might otherwise interact with folks on the streets. We try our best to set those aside, set our judgments and our perspectives aside, try not to rush anywhere, or not have any agenda. We're not trying to run past people or to not look at them in the eye. All the contrary, slowing down, just walking, making connections, trying to come out of all of those ways in which we might be separating ourselves from other people so that we can be more fully present and available for human connection. And so those are the ways that I think relate to that sense of going forth even in the early tradition. And just like for the Buddha, that sense that we can also occupy a space that could inspire faith, could inspire that stirring to trust, to try to do something, to try to have a different conversation, to try to go in a different direction. Now, I say this with a lot of caveats. We try not to be there with an agenda. We're not converting anybody. We're not trying to change anybody or fix anybody. But we do wear that religious garb of some kind because we want to, at least in the night ministry, offer an alternative space, an alternative time, an alternative conversation. And so, this doesn't mean, again, that we're out with this conception that we have the awakened state and we're going to go out there and give it to other people, right? Because that would also be this kind of spiritual ego, this sort of spiritual materialism, which is just another home, and quite an insidious one, actually, that most of us have to work with on some level, right? Another home to go forth from, I should say. So we're really not even trying to do that. And yet there's something powerful about holding that space. So what do I mean by that? There's many, many stories I could tell that would be an example of this, but literally just on my last night walk, I was walking through and I was wearing my collar and walking through the streets, and was quite active in some of the areas of the Tenderloin district where I was walking. And there's been a group of young men. It's kind of known to be a group of Honduran men who are in a gang, and they're selling drugs on this particular corner to all kinds of people walking by, people driving up, doing a quick exchange. And I don't know, there's probably 8 of them on the corner, and one of them, they're all young, under 25. And I'm walking up, and one of them sees my collar and says, "Oh, Padre." And he says, he puts his hands, and then he does the sign of the cross, and he says, I'm raised Catholic, and I just want to have you bless me tonight and just say a blessing for a moment. And so I say a little prayer and have that moment of connection with them. And then I move on. And it's something that simple. And, you know, if I wasn't wearing what I was wearing, and if I wasn't walking the way I was walking, that condition of having a different interaction, a different, even just a moment of coming into remembrance of a spiritual tradition, a different way of being, somebody who wasn't there for a transaction, who wasn't there for any agenda really, other than to make a connection, was maybe one moment that not only inspired him, it inspired me. I mean, it's just the two of us together co-creating this moment of humanity and connection, and having that presence in that moment is in my understanding, both an inspiration to faith, certainly inspired me to have that faith that a different type of search in life, a different type of being is possible, but it's also an expression of faith in that, you know, to the extent that we can share that space in an awakened and communal way, it actually is just an expression of the awakening that we all interconnectedly share. So that just gives you an example of many interactions. There are all kinds of interactions you see. Not all of them are particularly pleasant. I'm going to be completely honest. I mean, some of them are quite intense, but some of them are the most beautiful and poetic and creative and artistic things that you ever will see. And almost all of them are very raw and real. People do not have time for artifice or pretense. And so if anything, it keeps us all very grounded and very connected. And you just have to relate immediately in the moment. So by this talk, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of how I could ground some of what we're doing in the early tradition and in my Buddhist tradition, and maybe relate it to some of what you all know in your 3 tenets as the let's see, the not knowing, the bearing witness, and the appropriate action. Is that right? Taking action. And so it feels very similar of, you know, sort of coming out of or going forth from our patterns as best we can, and just being readily available in presence with another person, and seeing what the appropriate response would be. And so with that, I would love to hear a little bit about your responses to not only what we're doing in the night ministry, but also if you have any responses about this idea of inspiring and expressing faith in the night. So thank you for letting me be here with you. Yeah.
Thank you, Trent. And wonderful, wonderful. And I wanted to acknowledge Anne came in after we began, and perhaps might have missed the slides that Trent presented early on. We are recording this, so you'll be able to take a look at it again later. And my friend Joshin joined also from Vermont. And I'm so glad you made it here, because you have a special connection here as well. So please anyone. We're a small enough group that I think we can all. We don't need to use the electronic hand. If you have a question or an observation or a comment on Trent's wonderful prompt, or the sutta that he shared, or anything like that, let's share some time together here. Yoshin, I see you waving your hand. Go ahead and unmute, dear. Thank you.
Thank you. I have two questions real quick. One is why night? And also why, you mentioned Apocrypha, which is a kind of a Christian term, but why did you refer to the sutta as Apocrypha?
Oh, great questions. Thank you for those, Myoshin. The why night, in terms of the night ministry, is that what you're asking? Like, why do we do ministry at night? Is when we were founded back as a Christian ministry, the idea is that all of the other churches and even social services were closed. So the only thing open at night was police, fire, and ambulance.
Mm.
And so they thought, well, what about operating a phone line that people could call in and at that time dispatch the night minister to their location and within the city limits and have a fourth way, a fourth messenger, a fourth possibility for connection outside of those other services. And so that's what's kept us going at night. And then in terms of the Apocrypha, I was actually referring to not to the sutta, and so thank you for letting me clarify that. The sutta is definitely, in Christian terms, canonical. It's right there in the Pali Canon and the Majjhima Nikaya, but it's the story of the four messengers, I think, is a little bit more, it's kind of out there. I don't even know exactly what its origin is. I think probably all of us have heard it, but I'm not exactly sure where it fits, but it definitely has the power of mythic truth. And I hope that I honored that tonight. Is that helpful?
Thanks, Myoshin, and thanks for your response, Trent. Please, anyone, if you have observations or questions. Joshin, I see your finger. I don't know if that means you have one or.
Yeah, I'm trying. I got it. I'm doing this on my phone, and it's a whole other Zoom experience to do it on your phone. Maybe I apologize. Trent, so great to see you. I'm glad we're going to connect in a couple of weeks. And really grateful for your really wonderful and inspiring work. If I see some of my other Birdloaf Mountain friends on this call, if you knew how often we talked about your work, we hope you'd be happy.
The feeling is mutual, and we can't wait to connect with you. So,
yeah, I think this whole thing of just, I love the little story of, just walking and, connecting. And I think so much of the beauty of the practice is this thing you talked about of kind of just letting go of everything and dropping in and showing up, so simple. This simple act of walking, we so often think we have to be doing something really special, and what I love is the simplicity of the practice of just walking, being, listening, talking, engaging with another human being, and doing that inner work of letting go of all that karmic stuff you mentioned as best we can, and just being open. I love that Dogen describes enlightenment as openness. And I think this is a practice. Openness is a practice. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of just connect and, see, I think that's the heart of the ministry in a way. And this ability to just be present, show up, nothing special.
Nothing special. Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to connecting with you and the retreatants that are coming to the city in a couple of weeks. And yeah, it's somehow nothing special, and yet it's everything we've been looking for. And there it is. And I think that's the noble, that's why they call it the noble search, is that we all probably know it's at the end just sort of giving up the search, but you have to kind of go through the path sometimes too. And so it's a joy to do it together with others. Yeah.
Joshin, I don't want to hijack the agenda too much, nor put you on the spot, but my suspicion is only a few of us here on this call know what it is that you're doing next month. Would you mind just taking a couple of minutes and just describe what you're doing?
Yeah, I'm doing a Bearing Witness Street Retreat. We do these a few times a year throughout the country, kind of major cities around the United States. And this time we're in San Francisco. This is the first time we've gone out since the COVID pandemic began. So it feels really wonderful in a way to re-engage with this practice. And I think, as probably most people on this call know, it's a practice that Bernie developed, an upaya, skillful means of, kind of dropping into a situation where we can confront our narratives and stories and let them go, and begin to this kind of process of just becoming the situation and allowing action to arise from that sense. And it's just it's like I often describe it as a Zen koan in 3D. It's that's the effect of it. You just confront all of your linear narratives around who people are, and what makes them tick, and what their lives are like, and all that stuff, and just have the opportunity to let go, and see what arises through that process. So that's what we're doing. We'll be in San Francisco for Rahatsu Sesshin. It's the first time we're doing this as a Rahatsu Sesshin. So we'll be out, I'll be out for 10 days, but the retreat itself is 8 days long. And we're basically wandering for those 8 days, and we'll connect up with the night ministry every now and then throughout it. Is that enough, Jeff?
Yeah, that's good. I knew you'd get to that. For people who don't really know what a street retreat is, that you'd get to that, physical part, where your group will be out really, for the most part, without a safety net, as it were, no resources and no cell phone, and trusting the city. Thank you, Joshin. Wonderful. Anyone else here? Let's see. Do I see any other hand movements? This is. Oh, there we go.
Again.
Either Dagan or Sarah, and I don't know who's who there. So please go ahead and unmute. Thank you.
I'm Dagon.
Dagan, hi.
It's good to see you, at least on Zoom, Trent, and I'll be seeing you in a couple of weeks here. I'm a novice priest at Breadloaf, and I'll be on street retreat with Joshin and get to meet you in person, so I'm looking forward to that. I was struck in your presentation and in your story about encountering the Honduran fellow who was raised Catholic, and just the idea of someone ordained by Chogyam Trungpa wearing a Roman collar, and blessing somebody who was raised Catholic, and also the open Shabbat and the many open ministries where you have a rabbi and you know, it's one of those, like one of the old jokes, except for they're all there doing the blessing, the rabbi and the priest and the Zen master and all of those folks. And I've been doing a little bit of thinking about inner spirituality, and I just am curious from your perspective as somebody who's dealing with like wandering around and encountering people with all kinds of different faith ideas or traditions, and also working with many people from different traditions. If you have any words of wisdom about inner spirituality and what that means in our world.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and I'm looking forward to meeting you. So this is wonderful. It's a little preview. See what comes up for that. It's a very rich topic, and it's one that feels so relevant today, probably in all ages, but today, as we've become closer and closer in our humanity, it's also such a source of division and pain and violence, religious differences. And I think it probably always will be. That's my sense of it, because what the traditions are transmitting to us and what they do to help in carrying us is something that's so core and so existential and so powerful at that nub point, you know, that it's always going to be a source of tremendous benefit and tremendous potential harm. I think that's always going to be the case in a broken world. But having the ability to come into dialogue and to be present with others in a religious way, I think is a powerful practice. And it's something that we do at the night ministry in the same way that chaplains try to do in any context, which is to say, to be completely and authentically and deeply grounded in one's own tradition, community, practices, scriptures, so forth. And yet, as Joshin was saying, open, you know, that openness, that's it, the open Shabbat, open cathedral, it's right there in the name, right? To be as open and as accessible and as relatable to the other. And when we're encountering another person, at least in a chaplaincy context, you know, our hope is to try to let them take the lead and to the best extent possible, honor and even whatever is skillfully done and authentically done, participate in their expression. So there's a way in which it's a constant negotiation. You know, we don't want to co-opt or colonize or you know, misappropriate other people's traditions. But if there's a way that we can make a connection and be in presence with each other, both with our own, of course, individual particularity, but our own tradition as well, which has its own stream and energy and transmission and power to it, to be present in those spaces with all of those things, the individual, the group transmission, and of course, the great one truth, I think is really the walk. And for me, you know, the collar actually is authentic to my MCC tradition. We are ordained in a collar, even though we're not Roman Catholic. And I actually am Trinitarian as well. So giving the sign of the cross is no trouble for me at all. But we wouldn't want anybody to be inauthentic. Like if that was not something that was part of the tradition, you wouldn't be required to, you know, we don't ask our rabbis to take communion or whatever. You know, everyone should be, you know, authentic to who they are. That's key, is that we're showing up just as ourselves. And yet, you know, skillful means can be a little playful sometimes. I'm wondering how's that landing on you, Diane?
Yeah, I really appreciate all of that. Yeah, thank you.
Kat, I see your hand there. Thank you.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Very
Yeah.
well.
Okay,
You're
great.
good. Yep.
Trent, thank you so much. I am so looking forward to the CPE program in January. I had one CPE unit already in a hospital here in Austin. And one of the things you talked about, Trent, that struck me about how you wear the collar and kind of what you represent, this openness, this place that they can think about a different way of being, really struck me, because I remember when I was doing my first unit of CPE, of clinical pastoral education, and I would walk into a hospital room with a family, with someone who was dying, and I represented eternal life, and I represented something, this way for them to touch this connection that we all have with this person who's dying. And I had thought about it though, well, I guess, I don't know, because I didn't have a collar but they knew I was the chaplain. So just that title represented an opening for them to talk about what mattered. And yeah, so that really hit me, what you said on the street and your interaction with the Honduran men. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that, Kat. And we're looking forward to having you too in the spring. Delighted to have you coming into the program. Yeah, well said. I think that's it. And I think that does get back to the point earlier too about, that collar, that word chaplain, which I think evokes a kind of a priest, for a lot of people evokes last rites or something, Catholic. It also can bring up all kinds of karma that's disconnecting and troubling. And, that's, I want to make space for that. And yet what we do in the night ministry, we're standing on the shoulders of many, 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 many years, decades of the ministers going out and being known in the community as people who are not judging, we're not converting, and so in some ways that's also helped reinforce. It's just an invitation. It's just an invitation. And I've had people walk up to me on the street and right away, Pastor, I'm so glad you're here. My mother passed away 3 weeks ago and I haven't had a chance to process that grief. I'm so glad you're here. Immediately an invitation to come into a different kind of conversation and relationship.
Thank you, Trent. Thanks for your comment too, Kat, very much. Jens, I see your hand. I think I do. Thank you, Jens. Find that mute button. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really intrigued, Trent, because of your deep faith that provides a basis. I found that I got into this back in the late 60s when I didn't have a solid grounding in faith, but it was more just being there with my humanness, to be with that person. And this is in Ithaca, New York, a small community, but we had a group called Open House. And when we started, we took it and we unlocked the door and we threw away the key. It was open 24 hours a day and there was always somebody there that could greet. And I do remember the one that stands out is sitting talking with a person and them asking to borrow a pen and them sitting and writing. And as they walked out, a friend who was there with me said, "Did she write a suicide note?" And I said, "Probably." But I felt like I had been there as a human with her. And as she was leaving, I said, "If you want to come back, I'm here all night." And that doesn't have any spiritual connection. It was the same for me in working with the HIV patients in New York City and going to SRO hotels. It didn't have any. I became a Buddhist after all of this was done. I mean, it became a paradigm for me that what I was doing was the work of a bodhisattva, but it nonetheless is something that's even beyond that. And I hear that in your being there. It's not in the structure; it's in the humanness of the meeting.
Yeah, well said. Thank you, Jens, and thanks for sharing a little bit about your. Sounds like a wonderful history. I'm sure there's a lot of stories in there from your experience that I'm sure I could learn from. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think the word faith, one of the things I was trying to point to, because even in the early tradition, the culmination is not there's no faith in another object. I mean, the culmination is a kind of the great confidence, which I guess is another word for faith, which is the supreme refuge. And even talking about it in terms of the triple gem, the refuge, that's the true home, is the great vast. So, and yet there's something about just getting stirred, like, oh, there's some kind of suffering here, and I have a stirring to put my trust in trying to be a little more kind, or trying to be a little more human, or this teaching seems to kind of work, and we're kind of all doing the best we can, it seems like, trying to find those little moments of putting our faith, our trust in something, to see if it's something that brings relief and happiness, even in the moment. And I think it's very simple and practical. I think that's kind of what the sutta is pointing to, is that the path, the turning toward that vastness starts with just some kind of stirring, some kind of willingness to have a different conversation or a different interaction in the midst of it all. So anyway, in very simple terms, I hope that's what night ministry does at night, is we're just there to be that simple, earthy reminder, and also practicing ourselves, to come back into that reminder of that other possibility.
Trent, I wanted to, this isn't so much of a question as just, sharing the reaction that I had when you told the story of the young men. I know that part of town, and I was immediately able to picture that, and then almost viscerally, not, viscerally feel them as you described them. And I don't want to make up a story that's not true, but the feeling I had was, these are guys that are out there all the time, and somebody always wants something from them in a transactional way, or wants to take something from them in a violent way, or to arrest them, or shame them, or move along. I mean, it's just, it's a horrible, I don't know about horrible, but it's a very tough existence. And I had this image when you talked about greeting this young man of the empty-handed gift, and how extraordinary that must be for them to have that experience. There's no quid pro quo. There's no ask. There's no demand. There's no, well, if you do this, we can help you do this. It's empty-handed, and it was just beautiful. I just wanted to acknowledge that you touched me with that, so thank you.
Thank you. I can hear it. You're touching me in your sharing, Jeff. I can hear it, and my heart's opening as you're talking, and you get it. That's it. And so often I'm tempted when I talk to folks who don't know our work, or maybe even don't have so much of a faith tradition themselves. They want to know, well, are you giving out clothes? Are you giving out food? And we kind of do a little. We give out socks, or we give out granola bars here and there, but that's not the heart of it. And the heart of it is something that it's so incomprehensible to a society that wants the outcome and it wants a metric. And yeah, and I guess the other thing I'd say too is that it's countercultural in the sense that so much of everything we do, it doesn't have to be the Honduran drug dealer on the corner. I mean, how many transactional moments do we have, all of us, coming into just daily existence? Was so easy to treat ourselves and others as in a transactional way. And so there's another way in which it's just another human expression of it, not really all that different. And so I think it's important for me anyway to not totally other it. It's just another form that's happening. But I don't by any of those words mean to take away from the Sacred Heart that you just offered. So thank you so much for that.
Well, I'm sad to say that we just quickly, in the wink of an eye, spent an hour, and we are out of time. If anyone else, maybe we can buy another minute or two if we need. If anyone else has an observation or a question that you wanted to share, you're among friends here, so feel free. Maybe we can take one more before we close. Anne, hi, thank you.
I'm curious, you talked about being known in the community, and so I'm wondering if the city at night represents a different community, like it.
Yeah, very, very much so in many ways. Yeah, it's amazing how I can come back from a night walk in the early morning hours when I go on night walks, and feel completely energized by just what I've seen and experienced, and just the art and the creativity. And no question, there's immense suffering, there's mental behavioral challenges, there's substance use and abuse, there's all kinds of things that are both, it's one great mix of humanity, I'll tell you. But there's so many moments of just power and kindness, and even in the community. I was just walking with somebody as I was talking with him another night walk recently, and he had trouble getting his story out. He was a very non-linear thinker, probably was suffering with some sort of mental illness, and he would sort of go into these long, sort of almost seeming incomprehensible parts of his story, and then circle back to just these little clips of some kind of trauma in his life that he would share, and then he would go back and then another. So it's just like you just had to kind of be with him and let it unfold. And I was talking to him for about 20 minutes, and I was with some students, so they were walking on, and I kind of wanted to stay with the students. I didn't want to maybe if I'd just been on my own, I would have stayed with him for another hour or whatever, but it was kind of like, well, I've got to kind of walk, but I don't want to totally end this. This seems important. So he picked up some of his stuff, and he was walking along with me as I was kind of keeping my eye on the students and talking with them. And the stuff seemed a little bit bulky, and three people as we were walking called him by name as we walked another couple of blocks. Oh, and I don't want to use his name. I'll say, Brad, that seems kind of heavy. Why don't you put that down? So there was this total sense of community and kindness and looking out for each other that you might not expect or suspect as somebody who's outside of that community, but it's all there. It's all there. And it's the whole range of humanity, that I can assure you.